First off, I want to say, as you mentioned, I grew up in the Bay Area.
You can speak.
I've been coming to these events for a while, so I just want to say thank you to the organizers for kind of holding a space where multiple different disciplines can share insights and knowledge and kind of valuing everybody equally in terms of our different disciplines. So thank you, that's really empowering and really amazing. Thanks for having me. So this is my little thank you note to you. So imagining that each kind of circle in these Venn diagrams are a discipline or an episteme, an epistemology, a way of knowing something, different systems of knowledge. So the red one is art, let's say, and the green one is science, and the yellow one is history, or different disciplines, social justice, robotics, etc. And I think we can all agree that the place to be is really where all of them meet in the middle. And maybe this means that if you can translate an idea across different disciplines, then you're actually finding insight or finding knowledge or truth. So thanks for having interdisciplinariness thrive in the Bay Area. But this is an artist talk, so there's going to be some hand-wavy parts to it. And I guess being an artist allows me to make these conjectures. So yeah, just sorry in advance. Okay, so an outline of the talk. I'm going to talk about unsimulatableness, which is a concept, mostly maybe a philosophical concept that I think is useful for artists and scientists to think about, and generally everyone, I guess, which is why I'm going to mostly talk about that. I'll also talk about Earth-centered communication technology, which hopefully ties together some of the previous speakers' works as well. And it's a project that I did recently as part of an artist in residency at Nokia Bell Labs, which was also supported by Leonardo, so thanks for that. And if there's time, I'll talk about current projects. So what is unsimulatableness? The behavior of natural systems can be represented or simulated by mathematical and or computational means, which are symbol systems, let's say, and they can't. So unsimulatableness is that portion of the fact that they can't be fully simulated, or aspects of them can be simulated, but not everything. Or our experience of certain natural phenomena are always going to be slightly different than our simulations of them. So that's what I call unsimulatableness. But the cool thing is that things also can be simulated. So I think it's a very fruitful space to think about what can be simulated and what can't be simulated, and why, and what's the difference there between those things. And just to be really clear about the terminology, a mathematical thing would be literally an equation, a bunch of symbols, that is an equation. And a computational one is code, or it's running a machine that has the ability to read and write, the ability to store memory, store data, store information. So that would be referred to as the computational here, just to be clear about that. Another classical example is force equals mass times acceleration. That's a mathematical equation that describes a lot of phenomena in the world. And we can use that to make simulations that look really realistic of a ball hitting other things, for example. So this concept has been really kind of motivating in my artistic work. I think there's an aesthetic to simulation itself, and that simulation is its own kind of thing, its own phenomena. So I'm really inspired by kind of the aesthetic of simulations. These are videos, but I guess they're not. Okay. So those are videos, and this is a simulation of a phospholipid bilayer, and the thing next to it is kind of a map that I'm distorting and playing with as a digital media artist. So working with digital media and working with these uncanny spaces where it's aesthetically very familiar, but it's also kind of uncanny or has this quality of being a simulation of something. Okay, so besides that concept being really useful to me as an artist and scientist, sort of, I also think it's a really important concept for everyone to think about because, as some of you sort of hinted at, is we're entering a time when these two realms are sort of conflated more and more. So we have like the symbolic realm, the algorithmic realm, the networked realm, and we have like our real phenomenological space, our experiential space. So we're kind of entering a time when we have, our social relationships are more and more networked, or they're mediated by algorithms and applications. A contentious example of this is like, instead of existing in the world and falling in love, we use an algorithm that shows us images of people, and we have the algorithm kind of like check off boxes of criteria, and that's how many young people are choosing, or people of all ages are choosing who to mate with, which has like a huge kind of implication for our species, right? And this might not be a problem at all, this may even be a good thing, who knows? But the reason it's problematic is that as we scale things up, we are more and more like displacing our own sort of personal experiential knowledge, our observational knowledge, our connection to our own kind of intuitive feelings self. And I think someone had asked about the difference between feeling and thinking, and I think feelings are highly rational, and they come from the intuitive body and mind, which has evolved over millennia. So for us to displace this would be kind of sad, or problematic at least. And I wanted to recommend Julie Cohen's Configuring the Networked Self, if you're interested in that topic. But this issue is also kind of manifesting in the sciences. So on the one hand, there's like the personal, social, observational realm, but observation is also really key in science, which is part of the way that we come to know something. It's an episteme. Science is a methodology for getting knowledge from experience. But in the sciences, we are like increasingly just using models and simulations to draw conclusions about reality. Not to pick on this paper at all, this is like a random picture that I took from a neuroscience paper. This is a model of visual categorization. So they studied primates who are doing visual categorization. So good science has both this like experiential, observational side to it, and it has mathematical modeling, and both are really important. But increasingly you can publish a paper that is just an augmentation of a model that you just sat at your computer and you made a different model, which is not to dismiss that. I mean, that's also really interesting and amazing, but again, it's a different way of knowing. And it's kind of one aspect of knowing. It's not like the full experience. I guess like famously Darwin, spent years just observing organisms before really publishing any papers. So I think this like observational aspect of science is kind of being shoved over in favor of better mathematical models, which, as we may know, is also really problematic because multiple models can describe the same phenomena. So to say that the square is more true here than the triangles or the star, like what reasoning or what rubric do we have to say that when both of the possible theories that these dots are, a square or a star, like both match this behavior? So a lot of our sciences like gets a bunch of data or gets a set of observations, and then we try to match models to our data, but multiple models can describe with accuracy the same phenomena. So that doesn't really work. So Turing famously in the paper Morphogenesis, he starts out by saying, in this section, a mathematical model of the growing embryo will be described. This model will be a simplification and an idealization, and consequently a falsification. So I think it's really interesting that Turing was aware and upfront right away about the fact that a mathematical model is not a real thing. It's an idealization, but even more strongly, he says it's consequently a falsification. So it's like, he's like saying it's an active falsification of the truth or of the actual phenomena, which is really interesting. So, I think we tend to think of ourselves as like getting closer to truth when we can model it or engineer it. But here he's saying like it's actually a falsification of what it really is. And I put this picture of a plant here because I think we have many models of how plants grow, but when you actually observe a plant, there's so much complexity there and so much information, so much going on. But that being said, as an artist, I'm a really big fan of the simulation of natural systems, or like the organic aesthetic, which is kind of its own aesthetic. And one really good example is the space colonization algorithm, which you can make like vein patterns or like lightning things or branching patterns with it. And it's kind of a simple algorithm when you really look at it. You make a bunch of random points. You increase a line towards the points that are closest to you. Then you branch it off if there's more than one point, or according to some branching rule. And then you smooth it out, and you get these like vein-like patterns or these branching patterns. And it's really interesting to me that this works so well visually from the aesthetic point of view. Like when you look at it, it really works. It really looks like a tree. But that algorithm is not at all how a plant grows. Another example that I'm currently kind of fascinated by is evolutionary algorithms. So an evolutionary algorithm is really kind of simple when you look at it. You initialize a population, let's say. Then there's selection criteria, which has to do with like some fitness function that allows some of the population to continue and others not to. And then you just keep iterating this. And you can make things that look like an evolutionary process is happening, but it's actually much more complex. And if you look at all the phases in between each of these, like definitions, there's a lot of complexity. What is your fitness function? Why is it like that? When does a mutation happen? And moreover, there's no like environment in this picture. There's no question of like, what is the interaction with the environment that causes or doesn't cause an evolutionary change? There's a really good book called Evolution in 4 Dimensions, and it looks at all of the complexities and all of the things we don't understand about evolution, even though we have nice algorithms. For example, that stress in the environment can cause mutation to start up like faster, like more mutations happen. So it's almost like there's an environmental response to creating variation for more species to come about. So that's just one example. Like evolution is really, really complicated. But we have, I don't know if this will play, we have these really good looking, this is a video from SIGGRAPH using evolutionary algorithms to make these different creatures like learn how to walk the best way or the most efficient, the most fit way. And it looks really great. I recommend going to that link and playing the video. But again, so if it looks really great, does that mean that we have understood some aspect of evolution? Our perception is really manipulable. For example, if you change the image statistics on an image, it can look like a totally different material. So in this study by Ted Edelson, they took these images and they changed just one part of the image statistics, and you can see it just looks like a completely different material. My point here is just that our perceptual systems are they're a product of evolution too, and just because something looks good doesn't necessarily mean that it holds some sort of truth, but it's really hard not to see that there's a correlation. And so this brings me back to like, what is the useful aspect of saying, okay, there's this part of things that's really simulatable, and there's this part that's not. And I think the point is that when you look at a simulation, and then you look back at the real world, you can realize that there's that difference, and that difference is very interesting. So just observing anything around you, if you actually take the time to observe it, you'll notice like maybe imperfections, maybe we would call that an imperfection, maybe like disorder, like even if you look at the chairs in this room, like they're copies of the same chair, but each one is probably slightly different. So I think that's a really valuable kind of mindset to be in, where you're kind of encountering what's actually around you as opposed to thinking that things are known already, I guess, if that makes sense. One of my favorite examples of this is in the field of mineralogy. So we have really clear, kind of simple ways to describe the different forms that minerals take based on the chemistry and the physics of how the molecules arrange themselves. So this is an idealization of like a cubic form that's common in mineralogy. But if you actually look at a cubic mineral like this fluorite here, you'll see that there's so many like imperfections and kind of strange, weird angles in the actual growth process of the fluorite. So it's kind of like, what is this force of disorder that's around us at all times? And this is actually the surface area that ends up creating life because, as we know, like complex life emerges out of really simple physics. But if you think about it, like the simple physics of rocks and water are not actually very, like they're actually very complex. And maybe we could think of intelligence as part of a continuum as opposed to like a progression of evolution. So if you look at kind of naturally occurring phenomena, it's easy to see sort of computational or algorithmic aspects in the simple physics of rock and water. So a good example of this is alluvial fans. The one over there is Mars and the other side is China. And what an alluvial fan is it's a stream of water that's moving down a hill and it fans out because the materials in the rock are different weights. And what that does is it filters out the materials basically into like a pretty organized gradient of material. So you have like light materials further up, I guess, and then as you go down, it's heavier and heavier, or maybe the other way around. But the point here is this is kind of like a naturally occurring like filtration system. Like it's filtering out different, it's kind of organizing based on weight what those substances are. But we wouldn't think of it as like intelligent or, you know, algorithmic necessarily. A really good example is slime molds. People probably know about this one already, but it's a single cell, so it's not even two cells, it's one cell, but it's able to do these really complicated and really efficient networks across different nutrients in the environment. And there's just the generative aspects of evolution in general. There's so much variation in the biodiverse world that we live in. So I'm totally running out of time, but I guess I will just end with considering that we should observe what's around us more. And yeah, so some of my artistic work has to do with kind of like taking the disorderliness or the things that you wouldn't notice in the environment and trying to bring them into the digital space. So here's an example of like a very digital metallic aesthetic, but then it has these seemingly structured but also very kind of like messy qualities to it. And that's work that's kind of inspired by this general framework of the unsimulatable. These are some more, this has to do with plants and the complexity of plants. Again, like bringing them back into the digital and trying, not back, but I guess bringing them into a digital space and thinking about what that says about them aesthetically. So this is a project I did recently that is kind of trying to bring networked algorithms closer to Earth-related algorithms, if that makes sense. Yeah, I'm pretty close to out of time, but I'll just go through these. So I created this art installation, which was supposed to kind of like map lichen organisms into algorithmic have an algorithm kind of connect to the well-being of lichen organisms. So I had a bunch of lichen on a panel, and then I used a webcam to get information from the lichen, and then I had an algorithm kind of process that and feed back to it either water vapor or light. So I guess we can talk, like, ask questions about it. And yeah, that's it.